Welcome to the Focus on Parliament show today with me, your host, Okot Ola. Today we are discussing an important issue, a matter that has taken the opposition half of Ugandan politics to a retreat. And as they discuss the constitutional and electoral reforms, we are here on this panel today with my colleagues, Mr. Akampurira, the Speaker of Kawempe Republic. Yeah, they say a lie repeated many times becomes the truth.
Yes.
Yes, and Mr. Joseph Osheno, a UPC ideologue and media personality. You're most welcome.
Thank you.
Good to be here.
Our dear viewers, today we are discussing an important matter, which is an issue of electoral reforms. Uganda, I believe, has now had about 7 general elections, with 4 of them being in the multi-party dispensation starting 2005 up to now. Every election is an opportunity to learn. We saw with our own eyes in the last election, which was marred with a lot of grave situations, including a lot of killings. We saw a lot of blockage on media, blockage physically of different types of politicians. And yet today, again, our opposition sits, just like they sat in the last term in the National Consultative Forum, to continue and try to find solutions or reforms to propose and suggest to be adopted by government. Today we are discussing the feasibility of whether this is an obsolete situation politically, or if the electoral reform retreat that we are seeing today with several experts, legal, I saw Mr. Ndebesa there, a lot of brilliant minds, or it's just another tick box mid-term activity for the opposition. And on that note, I would love to start with you, Mr. Harris. Discussing this matter with a few colleagues, I noticed a lot of pessimism around the issue of electoral reforms. We have had reforms being pushed by both the government side, but also the opposition side. The government ones seem to always ride in. We saw in the last election, the last term, a lot of government reforms keep coming, presidential and passing. But then we don't see the fundamental pointers that opposition keeps pushing going through. And yet again, opposition sits in a retreat with all these brains, believing maybe that they can come up with a solution. Do you believe in this process? Do you think it can come up with anything? Or is it a tick box event for you, the opposition?
Thank you so much, Ola, for having me.
Yeah.
Good morning to our viewers.
Yeah.
I think let's first contextualize this whole conversation properly.
Yes.
In the political economy.
Yes, please.
Like you've rightly stated, under the 1995 Constitution, Uganda has had 6 elections.
Yes.
2 of them under the movement system, and 4 of them under the multi-party political dispensation.
Yes.
The last 4 ones have been highly contested. They have been a sham, clearly exhibiting a lack of public confidence in the process. The very last one, the 2021, which was organized under the environment of coronavirus, that we saw 7 being challenged by His Excellency Robert Kyagulanyi.
Yes. We
saw something that I have never imagined ever, because I was at the center of it.
Okay.
Yeah. It was...
Are you talking about November 2020?
No, the entire election process, because an election is not an event, it's a process.
Yes.
Yeah, usually starting from the registration of voters, the act of voting is the last act of voting.
Yes.
Yeah, one of the critical acts of voting, but the process starts long before in time. But my point is that it was a war theater, which has been the characteristic of our elections since 2001. High military involvement, military violence, intimidation, and arrest of opposition leaders and their supporters. As we speak now, we have hundreds of NUP supporters who are not accounted for, and hundreds others who are still in military detention.
Yes.
So that's the environment within which elections have been taking place.
Do you mean hundreds literally or figuratively?
No, I mean hundreds literally. And these figures, these records are with Parliament. It's not denied. Yeah, and you remember the November massacres, we lost more than 100 people. This is not denied.
The official figure is 54.
Yeah, it's 54, but the official figure usually doesn't reflect the actual figure. But even if it were 54, to lose a life, even if it is just one life in an election, which is supposed to be a free and fair, enjoyable civic exercise, is quite unfortunate. Unfortunately, this has been our reality, that every election you have violence, every election you have intimidation, every election you have military all over the place. When you look at the environment within which these elections take place, they give you an understanding of the mindset of the people who organize these elections. And that helps us answer the question as to whether or not we can have genuine reforms that Ugandans expect. And the mindset of Mr. Museveni and his cartel is that they are not amenable to fair competition. Museveni's regime depends on corruption. It depends on unfair competition if it is within the context of elections. And lastly, on military violence. Those three. So the electoral reforms as proposed, they are an attempt to change the status quo, to return to the constitutional governance, which, takes us to the power dynamics. Museveni's preoccupation is, continuation and sustenance into power. We have never had a peaceful change of government, and Museveni is not about to do that. So I join with other Ugandans who are pessimistic about these processes, because democracy is not given, freedom is not given.
But
these rights we are
Harris,
talking about.
Your political party is very much present, if not leading the current retreat. Is it a retreat in pessimism? Because that wouldn't make sense.
Well, I am not precisely saying that it is an effort in vain. I just want us to award it its proper weight, give it its right value. Ongoing conversations are important. And just like they like to say that with the water passing over the hardest rock, it eventually wears away. These processes are important. We need to keep talking as a nation. But it's also important to contextualize them and give them proper value, so that we don't give false hopes to the nation. So that in terms of the struggle, we know where we are at. So, and I'm saying that in terms of that, this is not something exciting politically that we should be hopeful about, that we are going to come up with these beautiful proposals, and after generating these proposals, give them to President Museveni, and then he organizes free and fair elections. That is not going to happen.
Last time
we are not going to have a free and independent electoral commission. We are not going to have the kind of parliament, the size of parliament that is amenable to, the social needs of Uganda. We are not going to have the administrative reforms that are needed. We are not going to have all those institutional reforms that are needed to return confidence in the institutions of government by Ugandans when Mr. Museveni is still president. So I join other Ugandans who think that the way forward is not the way of reforms, because they are going to remain on paper. Mind you, this is not the first time we are talking about reforms. Remember, the NGOs in 2014?
Yes.
They came together and National Consultation Forum and put together very beautiful proposals under the People's Manifesto or reforms. And what did Mr. Museveni and his government do? they just changed the name Electoral Commission to the Independent Electoral Commission. Nothing substantive was ever given. Why? Because Museveni depends on unfairness, on corruption, and militarism. That's how he sustains himself. Yeah, so that would be my take.
Yeah, and over to you, Mr. Joseph Osheno. The Independent Electoral Commission, I was reading today in the Daily Monitor a critique of some of the reforms it pushed, including that there should be voting for prisoners and diaspora, that there should be regulation of election finance, which is an issue we will pick your mind on later, but also that there should be regulation around electoral technologies. Are these small steps in the right direction, or is it something cosmetic? Yeah.
You know, as Harris was talking, I gave considerations, and I thought I would make my first observation by picking in from him.
Yes.
That in fact, unless and until Mr. Museveni is no more as the ruler of the republic at a state house in Tebe, the likelihood of any meaningful change or changes as far as constitutional and political reforms are concerned are basically hearsay dreams. I want to echo what my elder brother Lara also said, that unless, in as long as Museveni is around, any meaningful changes in Uganda will really be about Museveni. So in terms of what Harrison is saying, so unless whatever changes you're talking about benefit Museveni, his family, his extended family, and his clique of hangers-on and choir masters, and these days some beautiful choir mistresses, we are not going anywhere as a country. That said, I just want to correct two quick things, one from you and one from Harrison. It is actually not true, and I got with huge disappointment an observation that I saw from my good brother Kiza Besigye. Going further today, Besigye has always said sweepingly that there have never been peaceful change of government in this country. One, that's not true. There's been one. Besigye shocked me, and I had to respond on social media that we've never had a government with the mandate of the people in this country. That is sweepingly not true. And Besigye is talking on this very same platform, this same forum. So I wonder, as you're saying much earlier, that is this a sitting allowance conversation at a particular resort where political leaders are sitting or not? I must say that even the remarks and reports as presented by Mr. Chagulanyi, his lead comment, as covered by yesterday's newspapers, were possibly much more sweeping emotive statements rather than a concrete proposal. But I don't know the details. Strategically, therefore, Harrison is absolutely right. We need to be very deliberate about this. Does this country need a constitutional and electoral reforms? We do. But do we have to be under some illusion that we need to make some changes, and those changes will give us a return when the common and permanent factor is Mr. Museveni? No. But to re-clarify, 1962 general elections, that brought UPC government as our independence government joined by KY, was a free, fair, open, relatively democratic elections in which UPC won. I must say the concerns for UPC was the process of elections in Uganda. UPC decided to look the other way. But by and large, that's elections which has never been contested. And leaders today, Besigye, Museveni, Chagulanyi, Ochieng, if we have issues, particularly for the benefit of the majority of the audiences, including the two of yourselves, we need either to state the truth or to challenge certain nuances, because we want to be able to correct history, because these reforms are about where we are today and building foundations for the future. It cannot be built on falsehoods. 1980 general elections, which took Museveni to the bush, was convincingly won by Uganda People's Congress. In fact, much more convincingly won in 1980 than in 1962. Those elections have never been challenged. We've had propaganda by Museveni, and unfortunately, including my good brothers like the Besigyes, who themselves accept they got duped to go to the bush. Instead of apologizing to the people of Uganda that, sorry, we got it wrong because Museveni duped us and took her to the bush and we caused mayhem in Luwero, and now we are stuck with this guy 40 years. That's really what you want. But to massage it and sweeping it is extremely unfortunate. And I say so authoritative as leader of UPC, I'm extremely disappointed. When Museveni came to power,
Yes.
DP leaders, and NRA leaders, including the Blockages. Blockages was the political minister of the NRA. They had this power for 10 years. They had the time and opportunity to prove to the people of Uganda that this is the seat where DP won, this is the seat where NRA won, and the results was taken, and the total number. So they don't have the figures because it's not true. So foundations at the moment when we are suffering with Museveni needs to be one of honesty and intellectual depth, which I'm going to come to very quickly.
Yes.
So that is misleading, very disappointing. Then come peaceful transfer. It's a bit much more discussive, and I've talked about it, and I know people have a right to question it.
Yeah.
After the 1980 general elections, leading to the 1980 general elections, Mwangas had deposed Binaisa. And then the Mwangas as a military commission were government, but the presidency was a two-titular presidency, which is a legally constitutional thing, as you say.
Yeah.
When the election took place, Binaisa, who had been confined to State House in Entebbe, Obote went to Entebbe and not only got him released from there, taking over, but I'm told they dined and had fun overnight. So basically, Obote took over as president from the titular three-guy person and the electoral commission. So, and the military commission that includes Museveni. So, by and large, that was a peaceful handover, turnover power, because elections took place and the guys who were in charge, it was no contest. I'm giving context because for legal arguments, because the youth of this country, we need to get our history right. We can go into the semantics of how it happened, what exactly were the issues. So that was a peaceful transfer.
But in that one, Ugandans were not involved at all.
No. Which one?
The one you're describing, where
1980.
Yeah, the one you just described.
No, which one was that?
Yeah, where
Talk of the 1980 election.
yeah.
No, I'm talking about 1980 general elections. I know you were not yet born, but 1980 general elections was the parliamentary election which was won. The whole of, ask the people in Rukunjiri, the whole of Kigezi voted for UPC, by the way, for information. So no, except in Buganda, UPC won overwhelmingly across the country. So to say people were not involved, I don't know which people, because we would argue which people voted for Museveni. Which people voted for Museveni to State House? Nobody. There's a bunch of people who broke themselves into State House, in fact, backed by including friends like Kizza Besigye. So 1986 is not a people's thing. 1985 is not a people's thing. But 1980 was a people's thing. You're making it worse. I'm just trying to put it in context. 2 elections took place in Uganda.
Yeah.
1980 and 1962. Those were democratic elections. Political parties participated. It is not contested. Fast forward now the discussion around constitutional reforms. I think, where was the Electoral Commission of 1980? We need to go back and investigate the commissioners, their powers, the histories, and the experiences, including the allegation that Mwanga, because Mwanga is accused of telling the Electoral Commission not to issue results, but unless the results have been cleared by him, which I'm told Obote was quite uncomfortable as president of UPC and knowing how people might take this thing, But did Mwanga change any results? He did not. You see what I'm saying? So these are details we need to go to, and it's not about parties pointing and political scoring. These are facts that legal scholars, politicians, political parties need to be able to look at, particularly when we're looking at political reforms. Now, fast forward. What do we need? In the 60s, I saw some proposals about decentralization. I saw proposals about proportional representation. I saw proposals about this regional devolution.
Yeah.
Those are big proposals, and I need to say so at the outset. When I look at the time when this country has been genuinely developed, so as I was saying, I think generally, just to repeat, just to conclude this point, because I know I'm going on a bit, I think I am rather concerned that, say, opposition political parties and leaders themselves are also getting a bit carried away with this thing. And so basically Museveni just littering it for them and they think they're busy. No, I'm not quite sure there's much which is going to be able to change. Because if anything, some of the things that I try to talk about, whether it's devolution, the decentralization, all these other things, they're really not necessarily the panacea, simply because the current system has failed. As I said, the best times in this country was when we had a strong central government in the 60s, when we were able to provide basic health, basic education, basic infrastructure, and basic everything, by and large, for citizens across the country. What has really, by and large, seemed to fail us is that we're able to have a government democratically elected by the majority of the people, when there is consensus that that's the leader, and then we've got a good loser who says, yes, we're going to rally around you, and then we're able to govern. They govern responsibly for everybody, and then the opposition serves as a critical observer, critiques of people who are playing the former political checks and balances of the governing political party. Come the next elections, we have change of government. Those really are the issue. Now, I know that right now people are trying to find a way of getting rid of Museveni. You realize once we get rid of Museveni, we can now come back to term limits. The point really is, are we setting these things for individuals or not? I know the very same people who set these term limits. Apparently, they set it for Milton Obote. The time they're busy dancing for Mr. Museveni. Now, Mr. Museveni is the problem. They set the LG limit apparently because of Milton Obote. Now, they're suffering struggle with Mr. Museveni. The very same people thought they were getting rid of Mbu, those northerners, those Buzu UPCs, those Mucholis. They brought in Museveni. Now we're in a mess with Museveni. I'm just trying to say we need to be very open as citizens. And then final thing on them, these guys are at that place. These guys are meeting, you say, granted, the big brains. Fair enough, I might feel jealous that I wasn't invited, I'm not there. But the point is, these brains representing who? I want to know that the people at this retreat, are people representing a broad spectrum of the citizens of this country, let alone the people who in those political parties. For example, I don't know from a UPC's perspective, as you know, the leadership of UPC represented there is suspect. I don't even know how they got the invitation to that place. The official leadership of UPC is not there. But in the event that there is official leadership of UPC, I would expect from that leadership of UPC to have an internal consultation across structures, I think that these are really our primary positions.
It's meant to be, it's meant to have a national consultation after the retreat.
And so the retreat is about who?
The retreat is like
quick brainstorming thought, agenda setting.
And then they move around the country.
Fair enough, but as I said, just then to which case then to conclude, making my point. Constitutional reforms, economic reforms, political reforms are political party matter issues. A leader of UPC must have an idea of what the challenges are. So even when you're going to move around the country, what is it as a political party? The rest of the country should know that UPC is for revolution. UPC is maybe, say, for decentralization. Maybe NRM is for against decentralization. After all, the sentence in
that case, then there's even within the fact that these parties have to come together, and we have seen it over and over again. Not, for example, UPC agenda, DP agenda, but the opposition coming together to draft reforms. The same opposition normally intent on removing Museveni during elections. In between, trying to come together and craft reforms. Does that create the problem you're trying to elicit?
In part, actually, I was trying to answer that because you part raised that, I think, to Harris much earlier. It should be clear, maybe that's a lesson to political position in this country. The citizens of this country, like young guys like yourselves, ought to have an idea that this political party stands on this when it comes to constitutional reforms or constitutional changes. That, for instance, UPC is for changing for mandatory voting, for example. I have proposals that I'm going to bring in the second segment. For instance, one of them is that making sure that if somebody is found to have rigged elections, they should go to jail rather than going to stand in the same by-election. In other words, in the very least, go to jail, but in the very least, you do not participate in the election. Meaning you've been found to be a thief, okay? You stolen these things, a criminal. Criminalize the process. If we do so, maybe next time you and I go to the polls, I will focus on selling myself rather than saying that young little boy down there and sending my boys to beat you up because I know I'm going to get away with it.
Yeah, and then just to pick your mind a little further, recently, Tango Doi, your compatriot, was awarded a new contract. At,
My compatriot where?
Cynically, is it? Yeah.
No, I am a new Republican, so are rejecting me?
Pardon,
Okay.
yes, pardon the slide. But substantially rewarded, he was rewarded a new contract to continue with his time at NRM.
At NRA.
We have seen the by-elections. Harris, I believe you've been part of many of them, including the convocation retreat. So could it be a case where what we look at as the failure of NRM is actually the success of people like Tango Doi? Has it reached that level?
Those are agents serving a special machinery, and best wishes to them making the money and opportunities and the names for the grandchildren they do. But what they don't know is that actually they're busy. Basically they're busy doing a huge injustice to this country and the grandchildren of this country. That must include their grandchildren. But they should realize that actually when Museveni's mess catches up with our children and our grandchildren, their grandchildren are not going to go to some special heaven. That's the good news.
Yeah, thank you. and Harris, just before we close, it looks like the opposition is stuck in this mess. You have seen many times since elections the same dynamics: election violence. You're stopped from moving around the country before a particular point when it's too late, which is how much it affects especially grassroots mobilization. We saw issues around media houses counting votes on time, real time, all these things, and it's a repetitive cycle. Dr. Besigye in the last election said, I reached a point where he said, I cannot fight something that is a repetitive cycle, But then we keep seeing opposition participating in the same election. So have they just accepted their place within this wider system?
Well, it's Martin Luther King Jr., who said that the arc of moral history is long, but it bends towards justice. The struggle is a long process, and it requires strategy, grand strategy, not over just a few years, but over mid-term and long-term. Because I think we need to be fair to Ugandans all the time to tell them exactly what it is that we are battling against.
Yes.
So for anyone who comes to opposition politics in the country with the hope that I'm going to make instantaneous change, that I'm going to attain change tomorrow, then they have not properly understood the character of the struggle, especially against brutal dictatorships like the one of Mr. Museveni.
Yes.
Because, plainly put, what we are struggling against is military rule. Military rule involves coercion, using coercive means to extract economic resources from the population and use those resources to deprive the very citizens from whom the resources are collected certain basic rights, like rights of expression, rights of association. So on the one hand, you have, you know, one way or the other being coerced to facilitate your own oppression, if you know what I'm talking about. So you're fighting against the gun. You're fighting against state capture. And you can imagine the extent of a problem in the case of Uganda, where that has been the status quo for about 40 years now. So the military rule, the despotism of Mr. Museveni is deeply rooted. So therefore, it needs a strategy, and an appreciation, resilience, mental resilience, psychological resilience, that I am not going to give up on my country. I'm not going to give up on my land. I'm not going to give up on my rights, but at the same time appreciating that it is not going to be
Easy.
It's not going to be quick. So it's a struggle of resilience. It's a struggle of patience. So most of the time, I think the shortfall comes in when our political leaders come in, communicate, and make promises in a manner that lets people believe that the change is going to happen like so tomorrow. And
So,
then,
in your view, it's not because you've used the strategy and grand strategy, the
Yeah.
words more than twice. And in your view, is it more of let's have these notes, they're important for ongoing national discussions at
Yeah.
a strategic level rather than a tactical approach for the upcoming 2026 elections?
well, if you're asking me about the place of the ongoing retreat on the constitutional and electoral reforms, I would really delineate this to a place of just one of those conversations that are capable of re-energizing the citizens if properly, if properly organized and properly planned in a manner that it is going to involve national consultations, involvement of all the stakeholders from various political parties, from various civil society organizations, religious organizations. If it is going to mobilize all the citizens of Uganda to open up the conversation on constitutional democracy, on electoral democracy, then that's a good conversation. That's a good conversation, but it takes proper planning for it to be effective. And like I've said, every effort, when you're fighting, every effort is important. As long as the the small battle within the grand war is not mistaken for the war. Because we could mistake the the push for electoral reforms for the actual struggle. The actual struggle is to remove Museveni, because I am convinced beyond any reasonable doubt that with Museveni as president of this country, you will never have a free and fair election. You will never have constitutional democracy upheld in this country. So the extent to which the conversations around electoral reforms contributes to the struggle of removing Museveni, that is for you and I to ask.
Yeah, that's very interesting, because when I was listening to Mr. Osheno, he seemed to suggest that one of the problems with the previous arrangements around constitutionalism, constitutional building, is when they're timing. Their timing, or like a struggle like removing Mr. Museveni, because that could cause errors, but that such a process is meant to build national consensus behind generally what should be the ideal, probably brings out a better outcome.
Okay, maybe let me put it this way.
Yeah.
If, God's ways are not man's ways.
Yes.
If this conversation around electoral reforms is one which is going to generate enough anger within the citizenry to actually push on the streets of Uganda, then they are welcome. But if they are going to remain in boardrooms, nice and air-conditioned, elegant hotels, I highly doubt.
Retreat.
Because remember, it's as it's von Bismarck, the former vice chancellor, of Germany, who said that the biggest questions of the day are not answered by the biggest resolutions, but by blood and iron. That's a brutal fact that we have to accept as Ugandans. And I can pick the many lessons, many examples to learn from across the world. Our immediate neighbors, Kenya. You know what happened for them to get the constitutional reforms, substantive constitutional reforms of 2007? I think it was 2010, the new constitution of Kenya was 2010. But that was against the background of bloodshed in the elections of 2007.
Yeah.
And even when they said, okay.
Or result of pressure leading to the bloodshed. So it was something that had been built over a period of time. I'm making your point, but just to not to make sure that it's not necessarily you have to bleed blood. But it was by the time of 2007 elections, the momentum and push by the Railas and a number of other people, predominantly lawyers in Kenya and upper middle classes in Kenya, were quite resolved that actually the pushback against that was a pushback against change, but then lent into the violence. But you're absolutely right. From then on, Kenya has benefited. But carry on.
Well, I don't know which one causes which, because when you think about it, the push causes the blood, and it's natural, a reaction of all dictatorships. Pick any revolution anywhere where people have really pushed for meaningful changes. Anywhere, any country that has democratized, be it America, be it UK, any democracy that we envy today, and I will show you bloodshed as a turning point. I
just want to be deliberate here. And it's not that I'm dismissing it. And it's very, very deliberate to our audiences. That actually the emphasis, in my opinion, should be that young Ugandans, and particularly young Ugandans for whom is the reality going forward, must be prepared to inject energy to sacrifice. Not necessarily that young Ugandans must inject violence. It's those brutal forces in Uganda's case that respond violently, that part of that process must take responsibility. But I totally agree with you. The emphasis should really be that, those of us who want change must be prepared to inject sufficient energy, regardless of what that energy is.
I appreciate that point. Maybe I'm brutally honest, and I wanted to be as honest as
but I think
possible.
as a moderator, what I see as the minimum agreement is the issue around planning. It reminds me of the Green Book, Gaddafi. I think they started preparing for the revolution in university, and they would fast, pray, and do all these things for over 10 years. But the hegemony was so strong that they just marched into Tripoli. But I think
without it was just
a bloodless coup, famously.
It was a peaceful walk.
It was, the point being, the 10 years prior of intense, repetitive and consistent efforts, which I believe we all agree with.
So in this whole push, when we have said, okay, elections don't work, nothing works in a dictatorship. So what is the way out? What is the ultimate price? What is the ultimate price of a shift from a dictatorial dispensation to a democratic one? And that's the honest question. We must.
I think all the three of us are agreed. Maybe it's just a matter of semantics and language. And because we are all agreed. I'm just how I'm presenting it and how
you don't want to scare the young.
No, it's not even scaring them. No, because if you want to scare, I have challenged people like the Messages, for example. They speak very radical about some of these other things, and I tell them, like I was saying much earlier, because the alternative, unless we're saying let's go to the bush, maybe that would be a much more clearer thing. That we've had enough. Let's go to the bush. Because I asked the Messages, what is it really in 6 weeks after UPC government? That you guys could not contain, that you could not, that for which you couldn't go to court to do it, that you followed Museveni to the bush. Well, I'm not confining onto business today. So basically, the emphasis is that if you're saying violence, so what do you say? Do we go to the bush? What I'm trying to say, and I think what all I was trying to say also here is that actually, using the Gaddafi thing, the injected energy, and by that happens to be my approach, I genuinely believe that a mobilized, organized, sufficient, critical majority of Ugandan citizens, particularly of a particular social and economic class, that said no to NRA, Museveni think twice will begin the nonsense of impunity, including that of imposing his son on us. That Uganda is so silly, so incapable, that only his son can replace his wisdom. Which wisdom of his, after 40 years, I actually have no clue in a pot what Museveni's wisdom are, which are very much specially inherent and in the build. That must be, if it is not inherited by blood, then it's zero. That's what I'm trying to say. And then number two, you're absolutely right in a way what all I was saying. If we did that, Andrew Mwenda interestingly said this, that about 10 or so years ago, and I like repeating it, when Andrew was, we agreed with many more things than we do today, that in this country, if Ugandans went to the streets of Kampala, 1,000 of them, NRA will throw things at them, okay? And maybe they will kill a few. just like they dared killed our people the other time, you know. But if 10,000 went, they'll possibly kill a few, but they'll be looking behind them. When they believes that if 100,000 Ugandans say enough is enough and across Kampala, here we come. For example, arguments in 40 million, a million Ugandans coming say, no, we are not carrying no sticks, kill all of us. These funny looking NRA guys, man, they will think twice. I'm telling you, they almost certainly not throw a gun. If anything, their uniforms are going to look so ugly that they simply march Museveni's 1 million cloth and they will revisit saying, you are our people, we're not going to throw things.
Thank you, my dear panelists.
Exactly.
We will start from there.
Okay.
Our time is up for the first segment, and we will be back. Our dear viewers, thank you for listening in today. Focus on Parliament. Once again, we are discussing the issue around constitutional building and the electoral reforms in the light of the retreat that our brothers are having in Entebbe within the opposition auspices. Thank you so much, and stay with us for the second segment.
Digital rights are those human rights and legal rights that allow individuals to access, use, create and publish digital media or to access and use computers, other electronic devices and telecommunication networks. Digital rights include a right to freedom of expression, information and communication through technology, a right to privacy and data protection, a right to credit for personal works, a right to universal and equal digital access, a right to identity, a right to anonymity, a right to be forgotten, and a right for protection of minors, among others. The state's digital rights are frequently violated through various unfair actions, for example, blockage of websites and social networks, theft of credentials, unauthorized use of people's data for personal gain, privacy intrusion, online censorship, arrests and intimidation of online users, internet blockages, and the proliferation of laws and regulations that undermine the potential of technology to drive social, economic, and political development worldwide. It is hence every citizen's responsibility to respect rights of other digital users and to speak out or report to the responsible parties when one's rights are violated.
Thank you, our dear viewers, for joining us today on the Focus on Parliament show with me, your host, Okotola. As always, and many times, I am with Mr. Akampira Harris, who is the Speaker of the Kawempe Division. Yes, I was waiting for you to finish.
It's the Republic.
Yes, and Mr. Joseph Osheno, UPC ideologue and media personality, who is, as always, we are honored to have you, and we're always glad to pick from your wisdom. Today, we are, as we continue from our first segment, we are discussing constitutional building and the electoral reforms. As we have said, every election is a chance for us to learn something new. We have had 6 elections within this regime, but there's one more general election that we had previously. And we are in the continuous process of constitutional building, not just around the agents of the time, but for every single Ugandan for a sustainable future. Thank you very much for joining us, and we continue into the discussion. And I will narrow down just before we widen on propositions. Like I was stating in the first segment, we have the Electoral Commission proposing, and I know you will say that maybe some of these changes are not possible within the wider 70 issue, but then proposing that there should be regulation of financing or flow of money within the election times. How did we get to this point? We have young people, even within our age group, saying we need 200 million for an election, or 400 million, or 700 million. Why are we in this state, and how did it look in the past?
I don't.
This particular.
Indeed, I don't know the spirit by which the Electoral Commission is making these observation. I don't know whether it's indigenous to them. I don't know what drives it. But quite clearly, politics and elections in this country has become so monetized that, as I understand it, even children in kindergarten, in nursery schools, when they want to hold elections for class prefect and class monitor, they get involved with money. There's a story of one young primary school kid that went in a car or with a car giving sweets and many of those goodies. It's terrible. This is the NRA way, and this is being perfected by Mr. Museveni. So that creates an impossible situation in which people who don't have access to the national treasury, people whose treasurers and finance ministers are not called Kasaija, people who don't have access to the national, the Bank of Uganda, cannot participate freely in electoral processes. I can tell you that in youth elections, and I've been, as you know, I've been going around the country engaging with young people, and including around Kampala, you meet university students. You meet people who want to engage in student polity, which is actually the most important building space for your guys. You know, it built me from secondary schools. Now, somebody wants to take a role in the guild elections. They need excess money. But particularly somebody wants to stand for guild presidency.
Yes.
They will say, I cannot stand on a UPC ticket. Because, you know, although they built for us this country and I built everything around, for the moment then Museveni's pocket, you know, and Ochieno the other day we saw him, you know, walking down the road. So they really don't have money. So I go to NRA 1 because NRA will give me money that I will use to facilitate the process. Half of it I can now go and buy my Remio or the mini car, you know, and then go and impress myself and my crooked friends in a particular corner. I'm saying crooked meaning that's the terrible mindset.
Yes, yes. And
we know that NRA will use every equipment, including Kaihoro systems, to make sure that we win and then become guild presidents. It's not surprising, therefore, that we end up people with guild presidents at universities.
To be fair, Noop has won the last.
I'll contextualize it. Oh, no. That's not a sweeping thing, of course.
Yeah.
You know, we have my local councillor in my area, in Gongera, is UPC from the time I returned home.
Yeah.
You know, but NRA occupies my space. So I'm just talking about the matter of principle.
Yes.
You know, but so young people go that. Then the worst now is the next one, which is national youth elections. Again, I've met a number of participants, including some people who've been legislators for this, that it's impossible to go through unless you're backed by NRA. And you ask them, the original reason is money.
Yeah.
So no, it is crude. And then come the parliamentary times. For me, I was rigged out twice. One of them, a check of $500, and I went to the local commission. No, this the monetization of politics has gone to the extreme. But I just want to help Ugandans very quickly.
Yes.
I was lucky that when Museveni and co. banned political parties and thought we were the problems, telling Ugandans, and I was a university student who escaped to exile. I lived in exile where I was able to engage in student politics and local politics, including, in this case, the British Labour Party. I can tell you as a branch chairman and a constituency chairman and a senior executive at the local government equivalent. And indeed a delegate at fairly national, so fairly influential person.
Yeah.
I met ministers, and so did I meet prime ministers.
Yes.
I was lucky to have tea with the minister and to use my living room as a campaign strategy space. I don't know ever when the minister, my local area MP or councillor, came and said, Joseph, that is five pounds, including to go and buy tea leaves or tea bags. It's absolutely not there. This money thing is a culture thing and it's a danger. It has to be cut off, whether now. So whether it's brought in by electoral commission or not, it has to be dealt with. But like Harris and I, and you were saying earlier, of course, the two of us, okay, we spare you, you know, that unfortunately these changes are unlikely to happen in as long as Mr. Museveni and NRA is. The monetization of politics brings politics of cowards like Mr. Museveni who cannot debate. Monetization of politics brings crooked people who are going to thieve from the national tillers to pull back to themselves. It kills politics of ideas, competition of ideas, genuine democracy where citizens, even if Oola is not the young man of ideas and is Harrison, if they choose, oh, I've got a soft spot for that boy, he is my next member of parliament, and the majority of them feel like it's their boy. Let those people choose Oola, and let it not be based on the amount of money that Harrison brings. So in principle, it's something that needs to be killed. And unless and until we break it, we are not going to have leaders in this country who will be leaders to sort out the mess post-Museveni. We are not going to have leaders in this country who will be the big thinkers for our sub-region. We are not going to have the big leaders in this country, deep thinkers, who are going to be people who are going to try and turn around this continent so that Africa can look back. Young Ugandans Here we're talking electoral reforms, but we're talking about your future. People, leaders elected freely, democratically, with the constitutional embedments that protect and guarantee and makes that happen. Leaders then who will stand up to India, leaders who will stand up to China, leaders who will stand up to Russia, leaders who will stand up to Turkey, leaders who will stand up to Anglo-America, and leaders who will say, no, we are Africans, this is our interest first. But by the way, you're not our enemies, you are our friends. So no wonder we end up with mediocre people, to the extent that politics has now been reduced to unless you're a thief of my resources. You know, some of the guys who stole the iron sheets, they're already perfect organized thieves with lots of money. But if the psyche is that I must steal this iron sheets because I'm going to spare 1 million shillings, but then give this one to the church, that is the mentality. This nation cannot grow with the politics of money. I'm giving you the broadest principle of it. But the underlying thing is the bigger reform. Now, quickly to conclude this thing, I think, again, when we're having conversations with Harrison, I think during break, the big issue for the opposition in this country is not possibly this. The big issue for the opposition in this country is that opposition needs to have leaders. A leader needs to emerge. Leadership needs to emerge in the political opposition with the big thinking, how do we deal with this impossible dictatorship, which is nearly criminal? The dictatorship with Harris is so reserved, is not sure whether it can be removed democratically. What is it and how do we do this? So that's the thinking thing, that leadership as political opposition, number one. Number two, that leadership must be one which is guided by Uganda first, and so therefore must see a coalition of opposition ideas coming together. At the moment, you saw that my emotions were tapped at the beginning of the conversation because I see a big opposition figure in this country, almost either point scoring, or if they're not point scoring, and that is the level of their appreciation of our politics, that means then some of our big leaders in this country, even in the opposition, are wanting as far as sufficient appreciation of our contemporary history is. So therefore, they do not have the capacity to build foundations to give you guys, young people, hope. So I think it's very urgent that we come together. And so again, as the young man was saying, what is it is really our priority, turning around this thing. I think that to me is much, much more important than really even the subject that we have.
That is a Uganda first.
I genuinely believe that's Uganda first, and that one which is going to be selfless, and one in which I am UPC and I'm very clear about it, and I will not be NRA in Jesus' name tomorrow. But number one thing is we sit in as Ugandans, including you, NRA guys, even if there's an iron sheet thief, and we're sitting and we're having a conversation about the future, about our country, and about our constitution. So that the constitution, since this young man likes making quotations, we take it to the American thing that, well, these guys over 200 years ago looked and had First Amendment, and the Constitution is intact.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. We hear a lot of times, especially in eulogies, I think it was Mutevile and Eli Karuhanga eulogizing Mutevile and discussing their election that was grounded on socialism on one side and capitalism on the other. And a lot of, even the funders, you know, Eli talking about Indians funding the election and all this. And we start to wonder, okay, how did all this, we understand, of course, the wall fell, the Berlin, but where are the ideas anymore, you know? And this is something that's
very important,
it's always good to hear that perspective from you. Over to you, Harris, as we deal with, and I think just from your practical context, as we are talking about monetization in NRM and all this, NUP is very much involved in the elections as they go, and pretty fair to NUP, successful in 2021. We saw it sweep the whole region. We saw it sweep Kerere over the last few years. How does NUP navigate issues like, you know, monetization of elections, which I believe you want an alternative of the current state of things?
Well, the universal condition of man is such that man, by their very nature, are always in pursuit of certain ideals, high ideals. And these ideals are ideals of virtue, ideals of goodness, ideals of fairness, ideals of justice, ideals of equality. ideals that really bind together the society.
Mm.
So even when the Ugandan common person, the Ugandan voter,
Yeah.
is economically challenged, and therefore he is abused to accept money as a bribe to vote for the person bribing them, the Ugandan has not lost their human essence. They still remain human beings. In
Yes.
other words, they never lose their consciousness. It's very hard. That's one thing you can never take away from a human being. They can deliberately be pushed, but there remains that kind of internal resistance that says, in my very creation, in my nature, I am supposed to pursue these ideals. And you're giving me this money because you want me to overlook my ideals that make me a human being, that make all of us human beings, because you want to corrupt me to follow evil.
Yeah, yeah.
So, but there is also this resistance of saying, well, there is evil that Ugandans know that we are living in an evil state. They know that the soul of the nation has been lost and needs to be recovered. So where you see NUP winning, and NUP won across the country, it's a spontaneous expression of that innate Ugandan spirit.
Isn't that a debatable
No,
that
it's
it won across the country?
it's not debatable. It's not debatable. Well, according to the official record, yes, you say that.
Yeah.
But in reality, and President Museveni knows it, and those within security knows it, they have told him, everyone who is involved in security knows that NUP, specifically His Excellency Robert Kyagulanyi, won.
Yes.
In his hearts of hearts,
Yeah.
he knows it.
Yeah.
10 years from now, when Museveni is no longer here, and books of history are being written,
Yeah.
they will tell you that Kyagulanyi won, Besigye has been winning against Mr. Museveni. That is not debatable.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's not that, our challenge is not that there is lack of support. And actually, there was a deliberate intention in making sure that NUP is given Buganda, because it was given to them. Well, there are other factors. Buganda is the most urban area in the country,
Yeah.
so expect the levels of exposure to information and understanding
Even
of
the
governance
process of
issues.
redistribution.
Yes,
Yeah.
but they still rig because the Kayunga by-election, which was rigged here, was in Uganda. But strategically, it was choreographed to make sure that NUP is portrayed as a Buganda nationalist group. And that has been the strategy of Mr. Museveni, to utilize ethnicity to divide Ugandans across their ethnicities. And when you go into these public spaces at various joints or radio stations, or talk to Ugandans in their ordinary spaces, you hear these ethnic undertones.
Yes.
Because they have been utilized. Specifically, ethnicity and religion. They have been utilized and perfected by Museveni in his machination of the state. So NUP, Kyagulanyi enjoyed a lot of support in Western Uganda, where he was, but he enjoyed the support in Northern, enjoyed support in Eastern Uganda, but they declared results. They made sure he is seen to have won in Uganda only because they wanted that image anyway.
Sorry, if you don't mind interrupting. It may be a deviation, but it's important. Is it the case that NUP withdrew its petition?
Yes.
Why did they do within the context
And
of the
yeah, that was one of the follow-up. But yeah, you can answer
Sorry,
that.
Yeah, but before I answer that question, let me first cap off your question.
Yes, please.
So, and this takes us back to where we started from. That the problem is that we are under a state capture. Everyone is a slave. We are under military rule. That's simple. So everything else that is reasonable, that is logical, cannot make sense in the context of a dictatorship. And that is precisely what is happening. Museveni cannot declare you, even if you won him by over 80% of the vote. Museveni will not allow media to operate freely because that exposes him, that is anti his agenda. Museveni will not allow, the opposition leaders interact free with Ugandans because he knows once they interact free with Ugandans, then that is going to cause trouble against his personal role. Now, coming to my senior brother's question about why NUP withdrew the petition.
Yes.
As you recall, since 2005, there has been petitions.
Yes.
Besigye petitioned in 2006.
Yes.
And the Supreme Court was very clear that actually there was mass rigging.
And I believe it gave
the substantive question was, the substantive question then was whether the rigging or the irregularities were substantive enough to have, affected the election. Well, informally, and like I said, when Museveni is no longer here, we'll know what happened. The ruling of 2006 changed the nice to the day of the ruling. Otherwise, if we had a bold judiciary like the one of Kenya, then the 2000 election was going to be overturned or should have been overturned. In 2011, we also had a petition by Dr. Kiza Besigye again, and for the same question. And the judiciary said, well, the irregularities are there. The constitution has been abused. All the electoral laws have been abused. There was violence, there was voter bribery, there was everything. And then they said, but anyway, go ahead. Because, all the judges are cadre judges, and all the judges work not according to the law, but they work under intimidation. Come 2016, Amama Mbabazi versus Mr. Museveni, the same story. So, has going to court produced any results? Because you want to go to a court which is independent. Secondly, court provides an arena for presentation of facts to the Ugandan public. The facts in the previous 3 petitions before 21 had been clearly in the eyes of every Ugandan who cares to see that the votes have been rigged. So there was nothing much really in doing exactly the same that the previous candidates had been doing. What then, the question that usually comes up is, why then do you participate in an election which you're never going to be declared the winner anyway? And that's a hard question. Because one way, one alternative is to say, okay, we are not going to participate because
Honorable Dr. Besigye.
Yes, we are not going to participate because his party participated. Honorable.
At his level, him as a person, that was his.
Yeah, but he chose to participate. But his party participated and actually supported Amriat. So we can't say by and large that the party participated in the 2021 election. That's for sure.
Yes.
So is that one alternative is to say we are not going to participate. We are going to boycott. Otieno is better than me in political history. There was such a time when Buganda boycotted, and then UPC, that gave UPC an advantage to win. Although he declines to, accept that the boycott in Buganda actually undermined the legitimacy of the UPC presidency then.
No, actually, the boycott gave Buganda the overwhelming
DP,
thing because
it just gave DP.
No, it was actually much more.
It was supposed to be YK, but it's DP which took it. So
but
that did not affect us to our advantage. Just to clarify.
A boycott of an election also has its disadvantages. The reason why opposition's leaders have always decided to say, okay, let's participate, is because elections provide a platform, especially when you're a player. You say, okay, we are going in there, there is no leveled playing field, but we are going there to fight. The only missing link is that the continuity after you've been rigged, because you are supposed to use the rigging as a turning point. Say, okay, these are the facts, because you want to make sure that you present evidence, as we did in the case of Kyagulanyi, because the declaration forms, we collected them. Over 80% of the declaration forms from across the country were collected. And the 20% declaration forms which we did not have, we used the results as declared by EC, so that we have 100%, and we came to a score that I think that was 52% or 54. I don't remember very well. But the declaration forms clearly that we have up to today show that Mr. Kyagulanyi won against President Museveni. So the missing link is there, is in our inability to mobilize the citizens behind these rigged elections. That has always been the missing link in the strategy of going into an election which you know you're never going to be declared. But have they been in vain? No. Like I said, a struggle is always long term. There are gains that are made progressively. Surely, if you're a genuine political analyst and you're looking at 2006, okay, 2001, 2006, 2011, 2016, 2021, you see that there have been progressive gains. Progressive gains. And the reason why Museveni has become so highly handed, why he has become even more militaristic, in 2000 and before, 1990, 1996, he was a little pretentious. He was a little bit pretentious. 2011 was a little bit pretentious. But now, he has even gone bare knuckles, because really he knows that he can't tell any more lies, he can't use any more tricks. It is in the face of the regime that the greatest majority of Ugandans want change. And even within the NRM, the greatest majority of the party tell him that we want change. But he owns the gun. And that's where, that's the last hurdle to undo for us. So for me, all the efforts that are pro-change are very welcome. We need to be patient, we need to be consistent, we need to remain resilient, and know that surely everything finally comes to an end.
Yeah, thank you very much. And does that then suggest that all factors constant, Museveni standing in 26, the same electoral commission, judiciary, that we will see NUP participating in the same circumstances as, and with the same results as 2021?
Well, I don't know what the party leadership is going to decide. I think there is still some time. You know, things, like I said, things of God are so amazing. We could be here planning for 2026 and Museveni falls even before then. But if we go by, the current projections, I think the decision to participate is not mine to call. But if you were to ask for my personal independent opinion, I would say yes. Because the gains we have made in participation, we cannot water them away by the non-participation. Because we took a decision as 2001 to go for a strategy of participation even when we know we are never going to be declared. So 25 at 30 years down the road now, you realize that this strategy has not given me the results I want. You cannot now go back to zero whereby zero is boycott. No, it's about a matter of appreciation that yes, it's a struggle, it's a process, it's going to take time. Take stock, look around for the lessons learned, the mistakes that have been made along the way, weaknesses, areas of weaknesses, opportunities that are available, if it means co-opting people or collaborating and establishing partnerships with people like Otieno and reaching out and evaluating our strategies in our mobilization. Or if it is to say, look, all the previous elections, we have gone there as a disjointed opposition? Can we also now try a jointed force and we see what it brings? What I can tell Ugandans is that progressively, qualitatively and quantitatively, there are gains that have been made through participation in the elections.
Yeah.
So, and I want to conclude by what we learned from the Rumble in the Jungle. This was a fight by Muhammad Ali. Yeah, Muhammad Ali. Remember who he was fighting against?
Is it George Foreman?
Yes, I think Foreman.
It's
not. Is it Foreman?
Yeah.
No. There's another gentleman. But anyway, Ali was thinner. Vice President is a principal, was thinner than this huge guy. But what he did, Foreman, for the Ali, for the first rounds, he kept inviting the opponent around the ropes. Ali was more athletic than this other guy, so he keeps inviting him around the ropes, turning him around. So this guy becomes frustrated, he loses concentration, and he knocks him off. So this is a strategy that has been used in military science a lot, in defense science. And this is what I see happening within our struggle.
The statement is float like a butterfly and sting like a bee.
Exactly, exactly. So in that process, whether it's a dialogue, whether it is activists on the street, whether it is elections, whether it is a by-election, unfair as it might be, the strategies keep him engaging, because those in charge of the dictatorship, they're also human beings. They make mistakes. They have made several of them. They are going to continue making mistakes. They are going to make several of them. And time is going to come, and I have this gut feeling really that time is fast coming when they are going to make that fatal mistake, and that's a time when you...
Interesting. Yeah, I love the expression.
It reminds me of Kasai Judge. Boom, economy. Up to the roof, Mabati.
Yeah, but as we sign out of the discussion today, I noticed that the two of you, very senior leaders in both your political parties, are not at the retreat. So I would like to give you an opportunity to contribute to the discussion, to public. I mean, to not just the people there, but to the public and to the parliament.
That's what we've been doing here. We've been making very constructive.
No, I think that what Ola is saying is that we account why we are not at the retreat.
No, that's not what I'm saying. But in a very deliberate way. Just give your deliberation as though you were at the retreat itself. Are you there saying we should introduce this and this reform, or are you there telling everyone that we are wasting time?
I get you. I think actually I found very interesting, because this is still part of the conversation.
Yes.
I just want to say that I find it interesting, the decision by NUP not to prosecute, to continue the petition, particularly knowing very well, as you suggest, indeed as you possibly allege, but as you suggest, that you have all the evidence. For me, I think it was a wasted opportunity, lost opportunity. Because if NUP had gone and presented this evidence in public to court and tested these justices there, they make the erroneous mistake, you will have been recorded formally in history. And I want to tell you, as a political observer, not as UPC, that actually NUP possibly lost some points, by not participating. And Chagulanyi nearly allowed himself to have a few question marks.
But someone would say that's also an indictment on the courts, given the previous records, 26.
I'm giving you my observation, and based on that foundation.
Yeah.
You remember that Besigye, by the time Besigye was doing it, Besigye was quite right to say, look, I've gone there, it's a waste of time. For Chagulanyi, it was almost certainly an element of a dawn of a new era. And if they had gone to court, possibly their foundations to date would be slightly better and stronger, and it would actually put a much more stronger moral indictment against Museveni. And here I'm talking about the struggle in which all of us are involved. But that's just a matter of a quick matter of opinion.
Yeah.
That said, the biggest electoral reform I would want to see, is part of what I actually suggested earlier, is one in which people caught dishing up money and material stuff, you know, it should be criminalized. That once this is found, you know, it becomes a criminal matter, a criminal matter. One, and number two, and material inducements of any form. There was one thing in Tororo. Museveni is a very cheeky guy, you know. Two elections ago, in a particular sub-county, Museveni gave out jerry cans with his picture and heart. Quite clearly, these jerry cans are very ugly with Museveni's picture on it, you know. Apparently, his heart inclusive 1 million shillings, as it were, you know. But he was giving jerry cans to a community where there was hardly any water, you know. And I said, what nonsense is this? You know, these are quite insulting. So getting those jerry cans is not impossible. That when we find evidence of that, Mr. Museveni should not only be what would be the legal word? Mr. Museveni should his election should be nullified. But in this case, Mr. Museveni should find himself in Luzira. Number two, in the very least that Museveni is too big for the entrance of Luzira, because this is looking very well looked after in using our money. A candidate, whether it's at a local elections or indeed parliamentary level, so we are talking generally, that particularly say parliamentary elections, that a candidate Harris sues and finds that all had rigged, you know, materially, you know, then you call for you annul the results, call for a by-election in which the two of them again there, including the thief. So, you know, the thief should either it should be made criminalized, should go to prison, number one, but two, in the very least, the thief should not participate in the election.
I think
if we do that,
criminal,
you know,
and we saw some arrests in the last election, but the issue could be that's how the selection of who to.
This thing should, if this is the case, this thing should be beefed up and formalized. But then I also have something for the opposition leaders.
Yes.
Me actually think that maybe going for these things and listing these 10 reforms is neither here nor there and could be diversionary. These guys should be picking on one thing, for example, and the Kenyans did a number, but they would pick on the big things that every Kenyan knows these are the reforms we want. One, either making sure that the commission is independently elected, or the executive has got no say, or the justices or the judges before whom these cases come from, even if the Supreme Court justice, the panel and sitting must be, you know, of a particular number. I know that some of these kind of things might still call for further constitutional reforms, but it's part of the process. If you say there's goodwill, we need to be able to look at every aspect of the constitution, even if it means a referendum. So I think they need to be going for 1, 2 big things that make it impossible for the situation in which somebody wins an election but the guy hadn't participated. But let me, you know, in qualifying the Chagulanyi element, I want to give a current position. Maybe that's why I'm influenced. I participated in the UPC presidential elections. You know, I should have been president now 2.5 years on. And if I had been, one, I would be in that meeting. But two, most importantly, I would be in Uganda House. And three, this party would be substantially changed. And number four, you would almost certainly be a member. But number five, the nature of politics in this country right now, Mr. Museveni would be on the spot and on the well. But for the lucky that this did not happen. How did you know what I did? I say to myself, if I allow this to continue, it will be a semblance of an impunity in my party. And this impunity, I will have no authority to challenge impunity under NRA. You know what? I sought and I went to court and I've tabled the evidence. It's not surprising that now, unfortunately, the delay of justice has taken place, that now it's nearly 2 years later, I'm still waiting. But I'm still absolutely confident that at some stage, I am waiting for which judge is going to rule against the figures that I've got. I know all of them are cadre judges. And then two, on the one hand, for mine against Walobiri. And then number two, the fact that the Court of Appeal had ruled against Akena, you know, and I'm asking for a permanent injunction against Akena. I'm waiting to hear what arguments the judge is going to make. I know Harris is saying that, look, you know, I'm being too optimistic. I'm simply saying that put these guys on the wall, that regardless of the implication, to me, I think it's slightly a better strategy. I'm waiting for mine. I'm reasonably confident that I'll get it. But finally, it is the Constitutional Court that annulled Article 269 of the NRA Constitution. That is how NUP and others, and you guys should clap for UPC, because we pushed for that from 1989, you know, until 2004, when it was ruled now in favor. and there was, the opening of multiple political space. But there are cadre judges who did that. And then number two, 2020, again September, is the very same cadre judges that ruled against Akena and ruled that UPC members should have a right to freely elect their leaders. So to be fair, once in a while some of these things will happen, and some people will find themselves put in a corner. That's why I'm trying to say that whatever big strategy we are thinking about going forward, we should take on the Mwenda thing, that we should mobilize critical number of our citizens and make it impossible for Museveni to think Uganda is a Rwakatura crowd.
Yeah, you remind me of the words of Norbert Mao when you talk of cadre judges sometimes doing good. He speaks of every person is born good and bad. It is the job of society to tilt them on either side. But over to you, Harris. Speaking reforms, it's clear and scandalous omission that you're not there. So
you really want the two of us to be there? Why aren't you? And you're a young lawyer.
So yeah, I would like you to weigh in on this issue of reforms, not just advising what would be the intellectual space there, but the public and the parliament.
Well, firstly, the retreat is a high-level one. Mainly the opposition in the parliament.
Yeah.
So they started with the members of parliament.
Okay.
And then the top party leadership. I think that as the process goes on, we are going to be involved, surely. Yeah, so it's still very early, and there's no need to worry. But if I were there, or when I finally get my opportunity, and on another assumption, a very big if, Ugandans have the opportunity to suggest the kind of reforms that actually are going to be put into practice, I would like to see the following reforms to our constitution. Yes. Number one, cut down that size, that parliament. I think below 100 is sufficient enough to have good legislative work taking place. Yeah. Number two, we need to clearly delineate the scope of the military. And for me, there is no role whatsoever of the military in elections.
That one is urgent.
Yeah, that one is urgent. We have to remove the military from elections completely and many other civic spaces, because you can see the militarization that has taken place. Every street of Kampala has military as full-time. You may think that it's a battle a battle zone. Yeah, so that's number two. Number three, and related to the one of parliament, we need to cut the cost of administration. We need to remove some positions or some officers like the RDCs. This many people have talked about. It's a wastage. Then we need a lean government. Simply put, we need a lean government because we have a lot of wastages. And the research that has been done has shown that we lose about 8 trillion per financial year in government or administrative wastages. So we need a lean government. Number four, the Electoral Commission needs to be independent, and to ensure that it is independent, it needs not to be appointed by the president. So the Kenyan example is a nice one to borrow. Yeah. The cadre judges, I have no problem with the way judges are appointed. I've heard people say that judges need not to be appointed by the president. I think the appointment by the president is important to cross the judiciary with the legitimacy of the people. The only problem we have with the only reason we have a problem with the current appointment of judges is because of the overstay of President Museveni. Otherwise, examples all over the world, judges are appointed by the president. So if, for example, we had 2-term limit, then the issue of cadre judges doesn't arise, because Mr. Kyagulanyi is going to come in and find judges who are not appointed by him. He will have a chance to appoint just a few. And after 10 years, he exits another one, comes in and he finds. So the appointment of judges is not a problem. So I conclude by saying that the way forward is very specific and precise. It is hard, but it's doable. And it is what my brother has said. We have to mobilize citizens using our constitution. Article 3 of the constitution allows us to protect all these abuses of the constitution that have been going on, mobilize dissent, civil disobedience against the government of Museveni until it crumbles. Unless we remove Museveni from power or from state capture, we cannot truly have meaningful reforms. Thank you so very much.
There we have it, our dear viewers. A very resourceful session once again from Honorable Harris Akampurira, our dear Speaker of the Kawempe Republic Division.
Republic.
And Mr. Joseph Osheno from the Uganda People's Congress.
Just a quick 30 seconds.
Yes, please.
The quick 30 second is that actually the issue is not about removing Mr. Museveni, but this country needs a fundamental change. And the change which removes Mr. Museveni and basically removes Museveni's systems, at least some of the NRA guys to rest for at least 5 years.
Yes.
So it needs a holistic change.
Thank you. A holistic change, there it is, our dear viewers. Over to you. This process, and I think this discussion reawakens the ghost of Joseph Stalin, who way back in 1923 said, it is not important who votes, but who counts the votes. And whether you're a dictator or you're a democratic idealist, like my colleagues on the panel, you need to have a good grip on who counts the votes. Thank you very much. Let's all continue to participate on this journey of national development. Until next time, let's meet again here on the Focus on Parliament show with me, your host, Okot Ola.